8 months ago, I refinished this dresser in this two-tone whitewash and sage green color scheme, and while the look got quite a few compliments, when it came to selling, it didn't receive hardly any interest other than one person on Facebook asking how much it would be to repaint it, and nothing ever came of that. One of the things I noticed later on is that the top is more white than the drawers. The drawers seem to have more wood showing through. I think this is because I wiped the top twice with the whitewash. In any case, this mistake bugs me. It isn't selling, so I'm going to repaint it. To get started, I took out all of the hardware and all of the drawers so that I could work on the inside of the dresser first. This also reduces the weight of the dresser, so it's easier for me to lift it up and get it up on these paint cans. I like to put my furniture up on paint cans so I don't have to bend over as much when I'm working on the top, and it also makes it easier to work on the legs at the bottom. Next, all of this paint needs to come off the inside of the drawers. To do that, I'm going to use my Surf Prep 3x4 sander, link is in the description, and I'm going to be using this 100 grit sandpaper. The reason I'm doing this is because the gap that's in between this area and the bottom of the drawer is already very small, and sometimes if you add too much paint, this area is at an increased risk of getting scratched whenever the drawer is pulled in and out. I'm not going to do this to the whole dresser because my previous paint job is on there just fine. I'm just going to knock off these bottom areas and knock off the sides a little bit. They don't really need it, but I'm going to do it just in case. With my sanding done, I pulled out the vacuum to clean up my mess and then made a second pass with a damp rag to get anything I might have left. This piece sat near my garage door for a while, and when it rained when I had the garage doors open, it got these dirt stains. I was pretty surprised to see that they came off so easily just using water and a rag. I painted this piece with Fusion mineral paint, and since it was my first time using it, I was skeptical about how it would hold up, but it seems to have done pretty well. I'm going to use this Minwax aerosol lacquer to seal in these areas where I sanded earlier. Because this is raw wood, if I paint over it with water-based paint, there's a chance that the tannins in the wood will create stains in the paint, which won't really be that noticeable because it's on the inside of the drawer, but there is a little outside area that will show, and I don't want to have to deal with any discoloration later. I applied one coat to all of these surfaces, gave it plenty of time to dry, and it was good to paint after that. For the last part of the prep process, I used this 220 grit sanding sponge so that I could rough up my old finish, just to make sure that the new paint I'm going to apply to it has something good to adhere to. This creates a thin layer of fine white dust, which is easily cleaned up with a damp rag. Now that I was done with the boring part, I put all of the drawers back in the dresser so that I can paint everything at the same time. To paint this dresser, I'm going to be using my Graco Magnum X5 airless paint sprayer. It's a little bit overkill, but I love how fast it is. For the paint, I'm trying something that's new to me. This is Bare Marquee in a semi-gloss finish. The color is Beauty Queen. When I opened up the can, it looked like I was about to spray a gallon of Pepto-Bismol on this dresser. It didn't look this bright whenever I picked the color out at the store, but I decided to move ahead anyway, roll with the punches, maybe it'll darken up whenever it dries. I got the paint loaded into my sprayer and got ready to spray this dresser with this bubblegum paint. In a little over 1 minute, I had my first coat applied. It was about 90 degrees, so I let this dry for about an hour before I went to apply my second coat. This paint was covering really well, so 2 coats was all I ended up needing. Some of you may be asking, well, what about the lips of the drawers? Well, nobody ever sees that, so I don't worry about it. No, I'm just kidding. On some pieces, the gaps between the drawers are big enough that the paint gets in there on its own. On other pieces like this one, I use a sponge to cover this all up. Now, some people are asking, well, why don't you paint the inside of the drawer? And the answer is this is personal preference. I prefer the inside of the drawers to be wood and to smell like wood. Other people want it to be solid and match the outside of the dresser. But at this point, you might as well be painting the full inside, the bottom, and the back. That's a lot less common, but again, it's personal preference. To highlight the edges of this piece, I pulled out this Rub and Buff in antique gold and applied it using a toasty sponge. This process is actually pretty easy and a lot less time consuming than you would think, especially whenever you apply it with a sponge like this. I know it looks a little sloppy in some places, but I'll come back later and clean it up with some mineral spirits and get it exactly how I want it to look. You can apply this with a finger or a brush, but I personally always find myself making mistakes around the edges, so I just kind of go all in and clean up the mess later. one spot. Now that all my gold was done, it was time to go back and clean up my mess. What I usually do is take a paintbrush dipped in some mineral spirits and brush it on the areas that I want to remove, then come back with a rag and wipe it off. It usually comes off in one pass, but in areas where I applied the wax thicker, it might need a couple passes. Either way, it only takes a few seconds and allows me to get some nice clean lines. The last thing I needed to wax was the handles so that they match everything that I've done on the rest of the dresser. After the gold has been rubbed on, it needs to dry for about 15 or 20 minutes and buffed with a rag afterwards. Hence the name rub and buff, I guess. This polishes everything and gives it a little bit of an extra luster and also gets rid of any of the excess wax that may have been left behind. I did apply 3 thin coats of polyurethane to the hardware to make sure that this gold doesn't rub off in the future. Then I applied 2 thin coats of polyurethane to the dresser, letting them dry for about 30 minutes in between each coat. Then I sprayed the 3rd coat a little bit thicker to get that nice smooth finish. Because it's applied thicker, the 3rd coat will have a white, milky appearance similar to what the polyurethane looks like in the can. Even though this looks a little scary, this will clear up as the polyurethane dries out. I tend to let this last coat dry for a few hours before I go poking and prodding at it just to make sure that everything's dry. Once everything's done, all that's left to do is put the hardware on and I'm done. I'll be honest, after I sprayed that first coat of paint, I sat there and stared at this dresser for a few days trying to figure out what I was going to do with this Pepto-Bismol Barbie bubblegum 90s disaster. But in the end, I'm actually pretty happy with it. Every time I go in the garage and look at it, it's just a blast of color. I know that someone out there is going to enjoy this piece, and it may take a little bit longer to sell, but it's different, I had fun, and I hope you had fun watching this video. If you did, leave a comment below, subscribe, like the video, all that fun stuff, and I'll see y'all again soon.